Elijah had just called down fire from heaven. He had defeated 450 prophets of Baal. He had seen God move in a way that would make headlines for centuries. And then he ran. He hid in a cave. And he told God the most heartbreaking words a prophet could speak. I alone am left, and they seek my life. Have you ever felt that? Like you're the only one who sees the madness, the only one who hasn't bowed, alone in the crowd, in a world where everyone seems to be drinking the same poison, where speaking truth makes you the enemy, where standing firm feels like standing in quicksand. Elijah's story is your story. But here's what most people miss. God's answer to Elijah wasn't just comfort. It was a revelation that changes everything about how we navigate seasons of collective insanity, because you're not as alone as you think, and your calling isn't what you've been told. Elijah's dark night. Picture the scene. Mount Carmel. Elijah standing alone against 450 prophets of Baal, the whole nation watching. He drenches the altar with water not once, not twice, but 3 times, and then he prays. Fire falls from heaven, consumes everything. The prophets of Baal are defeated. Israel falls on their faces crying, "The Lord, He is God." The fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice. This should have been Elijah's greatest moment. The revival Israel needed had begun. But within hours, Queen Jezebel sends a death threat, and something breaks inside the prophet. The man who faced down an army of false prophets now runs from one angry woman. He travels 40 days into the wilderness. He sits under a broom tree and asks God to take his life. Broken. How does a man go from mountaintop victory to suicidal despair in less than a day? Because standing alone comes with a cost most people never see. And what happened next in that cave reveals something crucial about seasons of isolation. The cave of despair. Elijah ends up at Horeb, the same mountain where Moses met God. He crawls into a cave, and God asks him a question that cuts to the bone. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" "I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts." That's Elijah's answer. "I've fought the fight. I've stood when no one else would. And what did it get me? The children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek my life. Alone, forsaken, hunted." This is the cry of every faithful believer in a faithless age. You've seen the culture shift. You've watched friends compromise. You've felt the pressure to just go along. And when you don't, you become the target. If this cry resonates in your spirit, hit like and subscribe to stay in this journey with me. Because what God reveals next to Elijah is something every isolated believer desperately needs to hear. Not in the wind. God tells Elijah to stand on the mountain. What happens next defies every expectation. A great and powerful wind tears the mountains apart and shatters the rocks. But the Lord was not in the wind. Then an earthquake. The ground shakes violently, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. Then fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. Everything Elijah expected shattered. And then a still small voice. Some translations say a gentle whisper. Others say the sound of sheer silence. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When the world goes mad around you, you expect God to show up in power. You want Him to shake the nations, burn down the corruption, destroy the lies with undeniable force. But that's not how God works in seasons of collective deception. He speaks in the silence. He moves in the hidden places. He meets you in the cave not to give you a megaphone, but to give you something far more powerful. The 7,000 revelation. After the wind, the earthquake, the fire, and the whisper, God finally answers Elijah's complaint. And His answer changes everything. "I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal." 7,000. Elijah thought he was alone. He believed he was the last faithful man standing. And God says, actually, there are 7,000 others. You are not alone. You have never been alone. Where were these 7,000? Why didn't Elijah know about them? Why hadn't they shown up at Mount Carmel? Because that's not how God works in times of mass deception. The faithful are often hidden. They don't make the headlines. They don't go viral. They're scattered across the nation, keeping their heads down, refusing to bow, quietly maintaining their integrity. Hidden faithful scattered strong. And here's the revelation that should shake you. Your calling in seasons of madness isn't to find them all. It's to be one of them. But there's more to this story. Why isolation lies. The enemy's greatest weapon isn't persecution. It's isolation. If Satan can convince you that you're the only one left, he's won half the battle. The lie of isolation is older than you think. Think about it. Elijah had just witnessed the greatest display of God's power in generations. Fire from heaven, national revival starting. And within hours, he's convinced that everything is hopeless and he's completely alone. That's not just discouragement. That's a targeted attack. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. When culture goes mad, the faithful are made to feel crazy. When everyone else is bowing, you're made to feel like the problem. When you refuse to go along, you're labeled as the one who's divisive. But the 7,000 hadn't bowed either. They just weren't visible. You cannot judge faithfulness by visibility. And this brings us to something most teachers miss about this passage. Reserved by God. Notice the exact wording God uses. He doesn't say 7,000 have chosen not to bow. He says, I have reserved 7,000. I have reserved. This is God's sovereign action. That word reserved changes everything. These 7,000 weren't standing by their own strength. They were being preserved by God Himself. They were set apart, protected, hidden, reserved, protected, hidden, chosen. The Apostle Paul picks up this exact story in Romans 11. Even so then, at this present time there is a remnant according to the election of grace. A remnant according to grace, not according to your effort, not according to your visibility, not according to how loudly you proclaim your position, according to grace. When the world goes mad, it's not your job to convert everyone. Your job is to remain faithful and trust that God is preserving others just like He's preserving you. But what does this faithfulness actually look like? Knees that don't bow. The one thing God mentions about these 7,000 is simple. Their knees have not bowed to Baal. Faithfulness is measured by what you refuse to worship. Not their words, not their protests, not their social media posts, not their public declarations. Their knees. There's a difference between speaking against Baal and refusing to bow to him. You can criticize the idols of your age while still giving them your allegiance in secret. You can post the right opinions while still building your life around the wrong values. Knees don't bow. The 7,000 weren't famous for their opposition. They were simply unbowed. No compromise in the quiet moments. No secret worship of what everyone else worshipped. No bending when no one was watching. This is the true test of faithfulness. When mass deception sweeps a culture, the question isn't what are you saying? It's what are your knees doing? And this leads us to perhaps the most challenging part of Elijah's story. The hidden faithful. Why were the 7,000 hidden? Why didn't God parade them before Elijah? Why didn't He organize a rally of the faithful? Because visibility isn't the goal. Faithfulness is. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. We live in an age obsessed with platforms, with influence, with being seen. But God's economy runs differently. The most faithful people you'll ever meet might never write a book, never go viral, never lead a movement. They simply don't bow. Quiet faithfulness outlasts loud performance. And here's the hard truth. Sometimes God keeps the faithful hidden from each other, not to punish them, but to purify their motives. If you knew there were thousands standing with you, would you still stand? Or do you need the applause of the remnant to maintain your conviction? Fire reveals, and isolation has a way of showing you what you really worship. But this isn't where the story ends for Elijah. Elijah's new mission. After the revelation of the 7,000, God doesn't send Elijah back into hiding. He gives him a new assignment. Anoint Hazael king over Syria. Anoint Jehu king over Israel. Anoint Elisha as your successor. Anoint, prepare, continue legacy. Notice what God does not say. He doesn't tell Elijah to go find the 7,000 and start a movement. He doesn't commission him to expose every false prophet still standing. He gives him 3 specific tasks, all about preparation for the future. Your faithfulness today prepares the ground for tomorrow's breakthrough. When the world goes mad, your calling isn't to fix everything. It's to faithfully prepare what God has assigned to your hands. Elijah would never see the full fruit of these anointings. Jehu's purge came after Elijah was taken to heaven. But the faithfulness of one man positioned the pieces for a future he would never witness. One plants, another waters, but God gives the increase. And this brings us to the most important question for you right now: your remnant call. So where does this leave you? In a world where everyone seems to be bowing, where speaking truth gets you canceled, where standing firm feels impossibly lonely, what do? 1. Remember you are not alone, even when you feel like it. 2. Your faithfulness is measured by your knees, not your platform. 3. God reserves his remnant. Trust his preservation. 4. Your calling is faithfulness, not conversion of the masses. 5. Prepare for the future you may never see. Stand. The 7,000 weren't looking for recognition. They weren't building movements. They weren't waiting for Elijah to validate them. They were simply unbowed, and God counted them. God knew them. God reserved them. In times of collective madness, faithfulness feels like isolation. But you are not alone. Somewhere out there, others are standing too. You may never meet them on this side of eternity, but they exist. And together, scattered, hidden, faithful, you form the remnant that God will use when the smoke clears. Elijah learned something in that cave that changed him forever. I alone am left. The enemy wanted him to believe he was the last one standing. But God had 7,000 others who hadn't bowed. They weren't visible. They weren't organized. But they were faithful, and they were enough. Stand firm, unbowed, faithful. If you're watching this and you feel alone in your convictions, if the world seems to have gone completely mad around you, if you're wondering whether anyone else sees what you see, this is your answer. You are not alone. You have never been alone. God has reserved a remnant, and your only job is to be one of them. Don't bow, don't break, don't believe the lie of isolation. If you made it this far, comment unbowed if you're standing firm when the world goes mad. Stay in the Word, stay in the Spirit, and watch what God does. If this truth strengthened you, hit like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear they're not alone. See you in the next one.